أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. So continuing from Surah Al-Duha, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the favors, His blessings upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So last week we went through the possible reason of revelation where the Quraysh or the wife of Abu Lahab, Jamil, claimed and said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that your Rabb has abandoned you. Your Rabb is displeased with you, as there has been a break in divine revelation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that your Rabb has not abandoned you, nor is He displeased with you. In fact, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. So two meanings were mentioned here, that indeed the hereafter is better for you than the world, the present world. Otherwise, ulama have also mentioned that it could mean that indeed every moment in the future will be better than the previous moment. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. So the future will be better for you than the past and the present. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions afterwards, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, that indeed soon your Rabb will give you so much that you will be pleased. Never mind abandon you or displeased with you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you so much that you, O Rasul, will become pleased. So one of the hadith mentioned under this ayah is when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was thinking about the ummah, and he began to cry. And he remembered the statements of Isa alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then he began crying, thinking about the outcome of his ummah, whether they will attain salvation from the fire and enter into Jannah. So he began crying. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though He knows, He sent Jibreel alayhi salam to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to ask, what is making you cry? So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam replied, the concern over my ummah is making me cry. It is a fear of mine. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was given an answer by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that do not worry about your ummah, I will make you happy with regards to them. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will be granted this power of intercession, shafa'ah, what we call, where he will be given the ability to intercede on behalf of the ummah and also those who obviously sin from the ummah. After that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a few favors upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alam yajidka yatiman fa'awa, that did we not find you an orphan and we sheltered you. So like we done in the seerah already before, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's father passed away when he was still in the stomach of his mother. So he was born an orphan. Thereafter, his mother looked after him and she passed away when he was 6 years old. Then from the years 6 to 8, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib looked after him. Thereafter, Abdul Muttalib also passed away. From the age of 8 years old, his uncle Abu Talib looked after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he looked after him throughout his youth. But even when the trials were coming, when Rasulullah ﷺ claimed nubuwah, and the disbelievers rejected the message and they began persecuting Rasulullah ﷺ himself to a little degree, and the believers, he was the one, Abu Talib, despite being a polytheist himself, he was the one who protected Rasulullah ﷺ the majority of the time. So this was facilitated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that despite you being an orphan, we granted you shelter. So we placed the love of yourself in the heart of your grandfather and then your uncle. And thereafter, the people of the Ansar. So the followers were obviously there, but there were few in Makkah, not strong enough to protect Rasulullah ﷺ at all times. Thereafter he made his way to Al-Madinatul Munawwara, where the Ansar then after took care and protected Rasulullah ﷺ from the advances of the disbelievers. So throughout your life, despite you being born an orphan, I sheltered you. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى, and we found you unaware. ضَالًّا normally would be translated astray, like وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ at the end of Surah Fatiha, but it is not appropriate for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا, and we found you unaware, فَهَدَى, then we guided. So here there are two meanings. There could be more possibly. Ulama mentioned quite a lot under this ayah. However, like we go through just a simple, brief explanation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, we found you unaware. That's one meaning. When we take this meaning, we will have to understand that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite being saved from worshipping anything other than Allah, despite not being a prophet, he never worshipped any idol or any other god. However, he was unaware of the rulings and the how, meaning how to worship Allah. So when he was in the cave of Hira, he would meditate, or possibly, according to some scholars, he would worship Allah according to the remnants that were still around from the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam in Makkatul Mukarramah area. Otherwise he would meditate, contemplate over the world, who created the world, etc. But he didn't know how to worship Allah, how to please Allah, what is Allah displeased with. He wasn't aware. So وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this earnest desire to learn more. And through this earnest desire, he was granted, not through it, but thereafter he was granted the knowledge of how to worship Allah and who is Allah in detail, Jalla Jalalu. So thereafter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him the knowledge that he needed, how to worship Allah properly according to the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Others mention, we found you in a people who were astray. Not Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, but a people who were astray, and you were alone. And then alone we granted you prophethood, and then alone we made you the cause of guidance for many others. So وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. There is also an incident mentioned in the youth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he lost his way. Dal meaning he literally lost his way. And Rasulullah ﷺ, through different means, Allah led him back to his people. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. So we understanding the ayah, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. The idea that in the life of Rasulullah ﷺ, every coming moment will be better than the last. So we understand from these latter verses that you were born an orphan, then see how many people were around you and strengthened your cause. You were born unaware, and you reach the heights of knowledge. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى, and we found you in need, lack of resources. فَأَغْنَى, and we granted you self-sufficiency, or we enriched you. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was born obviously in a good family, Quraysh. Some of them were wealthy, some of them were not. Like Abu Talib, it is famous, he wasn't very wealthy. That is why, if you remember in the seerah, he actually handed over the custody of Ali, his son, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to look after Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu because of the lack of resources in the hands of Abu Talib. Thereafter he lived with Abu Talib, they would go on trade journeys towards Syria, etc. But they weren't wealthy. But the causes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always behind. One significant point mentioned here, فَأَغْنَى, we made you self-sufficient or we made you independent. So now there are two ways ulama have looked at this. One is the reality of money and finance. So we made your reputation such that you were known as as-sadiqul amin. Isn't it? The truthful, trustworthy. Through this reputation, thereafter you, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala, who was a businesswoman, not in the sense of today. She would send out other people to do business. But she was the brains behind the business. And she became interested because of this sidq, this quality of truthfulness and trustworthiness. She hired, or she told her slave worker Maysara, that get in touch with Muhammad, he has a very good reputation. So why not you bring him into our business and we will hire him, he will help you in your journeys. So through this, Rasulullah ﷺ was enriched. He began to gain money, finance, real finance, let's talk about. So in this way, through Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and then the marriage, we enriched you. We made you self-sufficient. But another meaning which is mentioned here is like Rasulullah ﷺ mentions many a time in the hadith, that true self-sufficiency or true independence is not the independence of wealth. That I have a lot of money so I don't need anybody else. Because it's not even true. Despite having money, you will always need other people. You will always have a need for people around you. So Rasulullah ﷺ said that the ghina, true independence, is the ghina nafs. The nafs has to be free. The nafs has to be free of any need. So like Imam al-Razi mentions, he mentions a straight point. He says there's a difference between being independent from something, and being independent because of something. So if you always are in need and have the thought that I need money and that money will make me independent, you are still dependent. But when you understand and you gain this quality of qana'ah, which is mentioned, Rasulullah mentions it many times, that you are happy with your situation, with your condition, whatever it may be, whether you are rich, whether you are poor, but you are content. You are content. And this contentment that I do not need more. It's not whether you gain more or not, but I do not need more. That is true independence. That I do not need more. I don't yearn for more. I don't fill my mind that I need to gain more. That is called qana'ah. And if qana'ah is an emotion, it is a condition that falls upon a person, so fa'aghna. Rasulullah ﷺ was granted this. And because of being granted this, he could then focus on the duties of prophethood. Everybody worries. Everybody worries about their finance, about fulfilling the responsibilities of the people around them. But then there is a limit, like I always mentioned, of where greed kicks in. And when greed kicks in, we understand that is the point when we forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Despite our worldly needs being fulfilled, when we do extra, and that extra makes us negligent of Allah, that's when we know greed has kicked in now. I have passed the boundaries of earning, and how much should I earn? And your mind being occupied of wealth, and how to attain wealth, and any worldly luxuries. It's not only wealth, but then what shall I spend my wealth on? And wastage of wealth. All of that is what is removed from the heart of Rasulullah ﷺ. So, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. We granted you this statement of contentment, this condition, this state of contentment where you felt no greed towards the world. Then after mentioning these three states, Whether you can call it poverty, being an orphan, being in need, and being unaware, a lack of knowledge. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, or three injunctions, three commands to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously after that expanding to the ummah. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. That remember that you were an orphan. You were an orphan. You grew up without a father. So when an orphan comes to you, فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, do not oppress him. When an orphan comes to you, do not oppress him. Oppress, obviously, a lot of meanings. Also humiliation, disgrace, scold, turn away. Treat in a harsh manner. Treat in a cruel manner. So an orphan is one that is supposed to be looked after. So Allah is saying, just like I looked after you. And the causes were your mother, and then Abdul Muttalib, and then Abu Talib, and then many others. After you grew up and came out, obviously an orphan is only till you are baligh. But you are looked after. Just like that, it is your duty and the duty of the ummah to also look after the orphan. And a lot of reward has been mentioned about looking after orphans, kafala, what is called. One of the famous ones is a person who looks after an orphan. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that me and this person will be like this in Jannah. Me and this person will be like this in Jannah. So the close companionship of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannah is one of the highest rewards for a person who looks after an orphan. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was very staunch on acting upon the Quran and Hadith. So whenever he would see an orphan, he would wipe his hand over the head of the orphan, always gift something. He would gift something. So in this country it is quite rare, obviously, to just see an orphan walking around. But in many other countries there are. Many other countries there are. So at least, if you cannot do something more, then smile, ask them how they are, gift something to make their hearts happy. There are orphans in other parts of the world where we can send charity. There are so many orphans and there are so many charities collecting for these orphans. So we should try to send. فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. And the questioner or the beggar, أَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ, do not scold him, do not rebuke him. So obviously, again, many meanings can be taken. Two famous meanings is a literal beggar. So you were also at once upon a time, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never begged, but he was in a state where he was in need. So similarly, there will be people like you who will decide to ask for money, who will be in poverty and hardship. So when this takes place, وَأَمَّا السَّائِلْ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Remember your own situation. فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Do not scold this person. Either give, and Allah will reward you. It will be stored in the akhirah for you. Ulama used to understand, and scholars mention, that when you give, example, it's Friday night, somebody might go for food and dessert. Isn't it? That money is gone. That money is gone. You may be rewarded a little, and then after the luxury, there's no reward, besides for your nafs. So, وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. But a poor person who you give, they mention that, understand that when you give a needy person, now he is taking it for you, the reward, till the akhirah. It's not gone. Well, akhirah is Allah, He is taking this wealth to you all the way till the akhirah, and that reward will remain. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. So one is about giving the poor and the needy. Another meaning can be taken, sa'il is a questioner, a person who comes to ask questions. So it will be now, instead of matching with the ayah that you were in need and we made you content or self-sufficient, it will match with the other ayah before. You were unaware. We found you unaware and we granted you knowledge. Isn't it? فَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى. We guided you. So if a questioner comes and you have the knowledge, then it is imperative that you then convey the knowledge. You answer the question. That is why in the hadith there are a lot of warnings about kitmanul ilm, to hide knowledge. So if a person has knowledge and another one comes to ask a question, then you should answer the questions. Unless there is a reason not to. There are sometimes there's a reason not to. But generally you should answer the person. So as a Nabi, people will flock to you for questions about Allah and the akhirah and the foundations of deen and normal rulings of everyday life. So وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ, don't turn him away, answer him. So two explanations are given. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. So we have taken you to such a position from being alone, no father, having more or less no resources, being unaware of how to worship Allah. Now remember the position you are in. You are the Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have been granted the highest level of knowledge. We have taken you in terms of wealth. Wealth kept on flowing into the hands of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he used to let it go. It's different having no wealth and it coming to you and you leaving it. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he grew and towards the end of his life, if he wanted and he accumulated the wealth that Allah placed in his hands, he would be a billionaire. But he let it go. He used to let it go and give it away in charity. So looking at the different situations you were in, whenever you are faced with somebody else in the same situation, then treat them kindly. And it is also obviously a lesson for the ummah. So now the position you are in, from where I have taken you to where you are now, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ, that the favors of your Rabb, of your Lord, your sustainer, your nourisher, فَحَدِّثْ, talk about it, express it. So one is to express the favors of your Rabb, is to utilize the favor in the correct manner. To utilize the favor. So I have granted you knowledge, so then propagate the knowledge. I have granted you wealth. Wealth used to flow through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hand, so give in charity. Anybody who comes to ask for wealth, give it to them. And encourage the good treatment of orphans and those who are in a weak position. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do all this. But moreover, any favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talk about it. So anybody has health, a person's in good health or in a good or favorable situation financially, mentally, spiritually, then talk about it. It doesn't have to be, don't attribute it to yourself, then you're going wrong. But attribute the favor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do it all the time. That example, du'as. When we go toilet and then we come out the toilet, we say, all praises for Allah who relieved me from discomfort, isn't it? Talk about the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. After we eat, all praises for Allah who granted me food and drink and made me a Muslim. To talk about the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. Under this ayah, hadith is normally mentioned, or a few hadith are mentioned, where one, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about kibr, pride and arrogance. And the Sahaba got worried because they understood arrogance to be like how we normally understand it also. So they asked, what about a person who likes wearing good clothing and likes wearing good shoes? Is he also got pride and arrogance? So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. That's not pride. Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. Two things ulama mention normally, that it shouldn't involve a wastage of wealth, extraordinary, meaning you can buy something for £30, don't spend £100, etc. And also it shouldn't bring arrogance in the heart. So spend, example, wealth if Allah has given you, but these two conditions shouldn't come. A spiritual disease, which is pride or arrogance or self-admiration, and also there shouldn't be israf, a wastage of wealth. Otherwise, enjoy the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another hadith that is mentioned in this ayah is, indeed Allah loves to see the favors, His own favors upon His servant. Allah loves to see the favors of His upon His servant. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you wealth, for example, then dress like it. Don't dress like a poor person. Dress like Allah has given you wealth. Again, the few situations will have to be avoided. Wastage of wealth, haram clothing, and any clothing which will bring a deterioration to the spiritual condition and bring pride, etc., then you should avoid. However, besides that, a person should dress according to his status. A person should dress according to his status. So Sahaba were always keen to ask these questions. Just to finish the hadith before, then Rasulullah ﷺ gave the true description of takabbur, arrogance, is that it is to reject the truth and to look down upon people. To reject the truth is pride and arrogance, and to look down upon people. If a person is wearing good clothing, that has nothing to do with arrogance. If a person is driving a nice car, it has nothing to do with arrogance. Arrogance is a separate issue. So these are the few things. Directly the ayat are aimed at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, like every ayah in the Quran, even if there is an individual why the ayah, or an incident why the ayah was revealed, the message is general. It is for all Muslims. So we should try to bring these ayat and these qualities into our lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a good tawfiq. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la